Hi, everybody. Welcome to this special recording of the Stockton REI Network. And we're here doing a special interview with Dave Foster. If you know myself and you know my experience, you know that I've done a lot of type of different real estate investing, from buy and hold to purchasing land to doing some value additions. And one of my experiences is actually purchasing a parcel of land in Stockton, California around 2015. I only held the land for actually 11 months, and I ended up selling that land 11 months later. And I made a great profit, but actually a lot of that profit didn't actually stay with me. I found out when I did taxes for that transaction, I was actually owing quite more than I expected because I didn't hold that property for at least 12 months. And also I didn't use those funds specifically for another investment. When it happened to me, I thought I was really shocked by this impact. I thought I was going to take home a lot more money than I did. And later, not until much later, did I realize that I had made a mistake and I could have saved a lot in taxes with a 1031 exchange. And that's what brings Dave Foster here to our group today. I actually came across Dave Foster's account on Bigger Pockets because I shared my horror story on Bigger Pockets, and Dave read it, and I could only imagine equally cringed at what happened. But he gave me some really great, strong words of encouragement about how to avoid this mistake in the future. And I thought it'd be a great opportunity for us to bring Dave to this group to help all of us understand more about the 1031 exchange, how we can become better investors as a result of it and save a lot more money and not make the same mistakes that I did with my early investment experience. So I want to first of all welcome Dave Foster to the Stockton REI Network and to this group, and to have him introduce himself and give us a little bit more information about the 1031 exchange. And as we proceed with the presentation, I'm going to follow up with questions that I think every investor should probably know about the 1031 exchange. And we'll have this conversation for the next few minutes, and I will provide Dave's information at the posting as well as later at the end of this presentation, so you can reach out to Dave with any questions you may have. So Dave, thanks so much for joining our group, and thanks for doing this recording. I appreciate you being here. If you don't mind doing an introduction to yourself to this group, and then also let's proceed with the presentation once you're ready with that.
Awesome. You know, what I actually think I ought to do is just take what you just said about your first experience, copy, paste it, and repeat it, which is why I had so many tears of sadness when I read your post originally. And yet at the same time, so many tears of joy that I wasn't the only one in history that's ever done this. It's like watching a train wreck, right? You keep your eyes off of it. And as I told a friend the other day, I said, nothing brings me greater joy than knowing how bad it went for you.
Mm.
But that's you know what? You're not the only one.
Sure.
That is exactly how I got my start in real estate. And that's perhaps the best introduction that we could give. A little over 20 years ago, my wife and I were had our first child. And the first thing we did was throw away the TV. Because when you have a baby, there's no need for a TV.
Sure.
It's just awesome. The second thing we did was start looking for ways that we could get off the corporate train and create revenue streams that would allow us to take advantage of time to spend with the kids, because that was definitely going to be a big deal for us. And so, like you and a lot of other people, we went, oh, real estate. Yeah, how hard can it be? Right? So, you bought some land. I went and bought a duplex, fixed it up, nice, sold it, made a lot of money, went to my tax accountant at the end of the year. And that's when he informed me, Willie, what you and I now know that we didn't at the time. And that is that every real estate investor in America has a silent partner.
Mm.
And his name is Uncle Sam.
Sure, right.
And in my case, Uncle Sam was going to do better than I was. So that pretty much is like, no, this is not going to work. Right at that moment, there had been a change in the tax code as a result of some lawsuits. that now allowed this thing called the 1031 exchange to be usable for Joe Normal investor instead of just the heavily attorneyed out. That was the game changer, because I had some really good friends that reminded me about it. I mean, I'm an accountant, but it hadn't even entered my thinking.
Sure.
And the kind of friends that are also so good that they mock you mercilessly,
Yeah.
and then offer you the parachute. And they said, Dave, we're going into business to do this. Do you want to join us? And I said, absolutely. And so from that moment on, I've done these for thousands of people. I do them for myself. And like you've experienced, these are such a powerful tool that over the course of 10 years, we were actually able to do several things. We moved our portfolio from Denver to Connecticut to Florida, and now back to Kansas without paying a penny in capital gains tax. We managed to meet our 10-year goal to the week, literally the week of our 10-year goal of sailing away on a 53-foot sailboat that we purchased with tax-free real estate investment dollars.
Oh, wow.
And so that's how I've lived with 1031 exchanges. And that's what I help people strategically to do as well. So if you're frustrated with your silent partner, Uncle Sam, I can help you out with that.
That's great, Dave.
And that's what I do.
No, yeah, I appreciate that. And I think a lot of people who are going to be watching this are equally excited about the opportunity to establish financial independence. I think, especially for me and my background, I've always been, after having that transaction, I've always been scared to sell right now because, I don't know when's the right time to sell. And so I think that's a great opportunity for a lot of our viewers to understand is more about this 1031 exchange and how it can create financial independence like you've described and how you've experienced. So yeah, if you don't mind giving us your insight into about the 1031 exchange and how our investors can take advantage of that, that'd be great.
Yeah, why don't we, I've actually got a presentation that we can throw up on the screen and run through that. I would encourage you, Willie, let's keep that question on when to sell in the back of our minds.
Sure.
And let's do some addressing of that at the end of the, because that's a very pertinent topic for right now.
Yeah, especially
Absolutely.
with home prices where they are at. I think a lot of people are
questioning. Oh my gosh, yeah, you guys out west are living in a whole different world. Okay, now we're in. That's what happens when you turn the non-tech guy into the tech guy every time. So Section 1031, although I discovered it in 96, has really been around since 1920. So it's not like it's this hoodoo voodoo and all that kind of stuff. This truly is an IRS process that allows you to keep wealth in your pocket. So a lot of people, they get worried that things are loopholes and evasion and that kind of stuff. Not at all. It's just that the devil's in the details and how you do that. So what I like to do is start out this short little presentation by talking about the two different parts of the tax code that deal with real estate. And you're actually going to want to take advantage of both of these because they're so powerful. The first one is Section 121, which deals with your primary residence. And what the tax code says is that as long as you have lived in a property for 2 out of the 5 years prior to selling it, then you can take the first $250,000, or if you're married, $500,000 of profit tax-free. And you can do this once every 2 years. So people wondering how I turned real estate into a boat. That's exactly through this. By buying primary residences, or in my case, converting rentals into primary residences and living in them and then selling them, taking that money tax-free, because you can do this once every 2 years. So you think about that, the national statistics are that we live in houses that we buy for an average of 5 to 8 years. So by itself, you're going to have 8 or 9 opportunities in your life to take money off the table tax-free. and go into your pocket and do whatever you want to with. So by itself, this is a great strategy. Now, but it's your primary residence, but it's tax-free. You can only do it once every 2 years. Now, here's where I live comes in then. Section 1031 deals with all the rest of real estate, investment real estate. And with the 1031 exchange, what you're actually doing is selling business or investment real estate. And you get to indefinitely, I use that word deliberately, indefinitely defer paying the tax that normally you would have had to pay. You do that by buying new real estate. So the 1031 exchange it's only tax deferred, but it's indefinitely, and we can make that forever. We'll tell you how later as we go. But it's investment real estate only. The nice thing is you can do as many 1031 exchanges as you have property sales that qualify. So there's no limits at all. I have several investors that have built up portfolios of hundreds of properties, and they will do 20 or 30 tax deferred exchanges every year to reposition their assets. And as we start to go through this, you'll start to see how and why they're doing that. But the key is they're never stuck in the properties that they have, because they can always sell and not have to pay the tax that you and I so tearfully wrote checks for, right? So that's the 1031 exchange 121 difference. Let's dive into the 1031 because it has a lot more stringent requirements to it. So there are 6 basic requirements that all have to be met in order for your exchange to be valid. There's a requirement on what kind of property qualifies. There are 2 timing requirements for the exchange period. There's the requirement to use a qualified intermediary. Those are people like us that actually do the exchanges for others. There's a requirement for how titling has to be held. And then there's the so often asked question of how much do I have to buy? What are my reinvestment requirements? Now, the key to this is that all 6 of these have to be met. If you only meet 5 of them, your exchange dies. So they are pretty critical that you have them running in conjunction together and you understand them all. So let's go into each of the 6 just real briefly. Property that qualifies is property that is held for investment, and the current use of that property is what is key. Now, I'll give you a little teaser because here's why that's important. When you're selling your primary residence, you only have to have lived in that property for 2 out of the last 5 years. So you could use advantageous financing. I'll bet there's a few people out there listening right now that have done this. Use advantageous primary residence financing. Buy a property, live in it, then move out and rent it. If you lived in it for 2 years and then moved out and rented it for up to 3 years, then you ask the question, did I live in this property for 2 out of the 5 years prior to sale? The answer is yes, right? So that property would qualify for the primary residence exemption, even though it's currently being used as a rental. Right? So the difference with 1031 is when you sell that property, it must be used at that moment for investment purposes. So the use is key. You can use it in your trade. Maybe you're a farmer and the land is what you farm, or maybe you have a restaurant and the building is where you run your restaurant out of. You're using it in your trade. You're using it for business, as in like the normal landlord. My business is to make money by renting things, so it's used in my business, or for investment. Now, what investment means is that I am buying this property because it's going to be worth more in the future. I'm planning on holding it. My intent, remember that word, Willie, my intent is to hold this property for productive use. So I may hold it because it's going to appreciate, and that's awesome. That qualifies for 1031. What doesn't qualify is I can get that property for 50% of what it's worth now. I can buy that and sell it today and make 50% of my money.
Right.
When you're doing that, your intent is not to hold, it's to sell. And so that does not qualify for 1031 treatment. Any property that's held for income or used to produce income can be exchanged for any other kind of investment property. So the type of property doesn't matter. It's only, is it property that I hold with the intent of investment? So what's kind of nice is, my guess is probably most of your folks right now started out as single family investors.
Right.
Well, at some point in time, it's kind of nice to think about getting that duplex,
right,
or that small apartment building, or that commercial building, or that commercial strip center, or that piece of raw land. All of those are interchangeably qualifying for 1031 as long as your intent is to use them for investment purposes. So you can change types of property very easily. Now, the definition of real estate is defined by the states, which can get kind of quirky, but things like mobile home parks or timeshares, as long as you get a property deed. And actually, I think there's probably some of these things in California as well. We have them in Florida. They are little places where there's slips basically in the water where you pull your boat into.
Oh yeah, sure.
Right. But because they have been treated and condominium docks have been made, every year, if you own that, you get a tax bill from the tax assessor and the county property appraiser.
Sure.
That makes that slip, that hole in the water,
a
piece of real estate.
Great.
You know what we call those? Documiniums. So certain states, Florida, probably California, treat documiniums. Now, what's more closer to home, though, are things like mobile homes. When the mobile home conveys with the land, it becomes real estate. How do we know that? Because every year you get a deed from the state of California for your property tax, and that includes the land and the mobile home. If you have a lot that you rent to people who bring their mobile homes, the mobile home is not real estate. Or if you have a mobile home that you put on a lot you rent, it's not real estate. And the reason we know that is because you get a re-registration notice from the DMV every year. So that's how the states define what real estate is. Now, hold period, because I'll bet there's a whole lot of adrenaline junkies just like you and me, and we love to buy stuff and fix it and flip it. So the problem is that Section 1031 doesn't like fixer flippers. The reason is that your intent is not to hold. Your intent is primarily to resell. So it doesn't qualify. But what's the statutory holding period? There isn't one. Most people will feel comfortable at a hold of anything more than 1 year. And the reason for that is it always, just what you addressed at the very beginning, it always turns the gain from ordinary income into a capital gain. So that lowers the rate anyways, and it feels longer. But it also makes sure that no matter when you purchase the property, that it's going to go on 2 consecutive tax returns as investment. So really, in IRS speak, how many tax years did you own the property? 2.
Sure.
As long as you hold it across 12 months. So, but the real standard is your intent and how you can prove it. Property that qualifies for 1031 is U.S. property for other U.S. property or territories like Guam, the American Samoas, and the U.S. Virgin Islands. Puerto Rico does not count, I'm sorry.
Sure.
But you can't sell in California and buy in the Bahamas, nor can you sell in the Dominican Republic and buy in South Dakota. It's U.S. property for U.S. property. It's foreign property for foreign property. Now, rental property is always going to be an investment, but bare land also is always going to be an investment. And the reason why we mention this is because rental property generates income, bare land many times doesn't. So actual production of income is not the standard. It's how you are intending to use it. I sometimes jokingly say that, people say, well, what if I can't rent this? What if I'm not making as much rent?
Right.
The IRS only requires that you be a business person. They never require that you be a good business person.
Sure.
So there's hope for you there. Now, here's an example, and there's a reason why I do this. Bill and Jane have a duplex somewhere near you in Stockton.
Sure.
They've owned it for a while. They want to sell it. They want to go buy a condo at Mammoth. And they're going to use it some themselves, and they're going to rent it out as a ski rental.
Sure.
Would that qualify for 1031? And the answer is yes. So what's important about this? You can move from something that you never use into something that you actually enjoy some. So some personal use does not disqualify it for 1031 purposes. So I think you're starting to see that in terms of what types of property you can move into, the sky's the limit. Anywhere in the United States, any type of property, from something that is wholly investment to something you use some yourself a little bit.
Dave, just a quick question on the personal use piece that you talked about in that previous slide. So I noticed in the slide it mentioned a little bit of personal use. Is there a requirement on how much personal use, for example, how many days of the year you're in the property?
Yeah, there's nothing in statute that requires a certain amount. Now, there is a safe harbor from the IRS at 2 years if you've only used it for 14 days a year or less, or 10% of the number of days it's rented, and that does not include number of days you're in there working on it. So let's flesh that out a little bit. What all that is a guarantee from the IRS. It's not saying that it has to be that way. So can you use it more than that? Well, certainly, as long as you can still demonstrate that your intent is to hold it for investment.
Got it.
So we have people all over that will put something up for rent 365 days a year, and they'll look out a week ahead and say, is it rented? Great. If it's not, let's go spend time in it.
Right.
So are you holding that for investment? Absolutely. Are you maybe using it more than 14 days? Sure, could be. That doesn't disqualify. What the other limiter on that is that originally the 14-day rule was really designed to explain whether or not you could depreciate the property. So it really was never specifically designed to talk about 1031. It was to talk about whether you could deduct mortgage interest and whether or not you could depreciate it.
Sure.
But it's kind of got melded a little bit. But by the way, on the other end of things, I have some clients in Fort Myers, Florida, that are in there so much during the winter because they have to be working on it. Evidently, the automatic sprinklers are very prone to breaking in the winter freezes.
Gotcha.
So they're in there working on their properties quite a bit. Whatever your intent is, but more importantly, how you can demonstrate that is what's going to be important.
Gotcha.
So 45-day rule. From the day that you close the sale, you have 45 calendar days, and that includes holidays, weekends, everything, to identify your potential replacement properties. Now, during that period of time, within the 45-day period, you got two options. You can either actually close on the new property, and that's great if you can do that, because that just gets the cash flow started again
Sure.
that much more quickly. Or you can simply provide a written list of what your potential replacement properties are going to be. It does have to be in writing. It has to be in our office by midnight on day 45, and it's got to be a specific identification. You can't bring in the Stockton phone book and hand it to me and say, this is my identification list.
Right.
So it's got to be specific identifications. And here's how they limit you. You can buy all the properties you want. You can buy as much more than you sell as you want. The booger is in how you identify them. Now, as long as you identify 3 or fewer replacement properties, it doesn't matter what they're worth. So let's use an example that will carry through. You could sell a property for $100,000 and you could name $3 million properties on it. Perfectly fine.
Sure.
And you're obviously going to have to close on one of those, but you can name, it could be worth however much you want. If you want to name more than 3 properties, so you're kind of thinking, hey, I'd like to buy 4.
Sure.
So I got to name 4 more. You can do that, but the total value of your list can't be more than 200% the value of what you sold.
Sure.
So if we sold for $100,000, we wanted to name 4 $50,000 properties, that would be fine. Because 4 times 50 is 200,000.
Right.
200,000 is 200% of what I sold. That works. But what you could not do is name 3 $50,000 properties and 1 $75,000 property, because that equals more than 200% of what you sold.
Mm-hmm.
Unless you actually purchase 95% of the value of your list. Mm-hmm. So if you name 4 properties, 350s and 175, you named $225,000 of property. You would have to purchase 95% of that property. So when you think about it, how many properties do I have to purchase? All 4 of them.
Right.
In order for that to work. So this can be done. And a lot of people do it when they're selling a larger asset and wanting to buy much smaller assets.
Sure.
It can work very nicely. The key is going to be that you want to do as much work during that 45-day period as you can, because nothing matters until day 45 ends.
Right.
And then you can't change anything on the list.
Gotcha.
We all know things like wildfires for you guys, things like hurricanes for us, and things like a pandemic for all of us. Mm-hmm. But there's never going to be an individual exception or an extension for you, me, or anybody else. Mm-hmm. So while exceptions and extensions are kind of nice things to hope for,
sure,
you're never going to get one for yourself. So if you get one, remember the price everybody else is paying for your exception. So yeah, 2 things have to happen. The president has to declare a national disaster, right, and the IRS has to agree with him.
Wow.
Imagine the odds of that, right? So that's it. So let's just bring home that 3 property, 200% rule again. Bill and Jane selling for 100,000. They want to identify 2 or 3 for 10 million each. Can they do that? Sure, because they named 3 or fewer on their list. Bill and Jane sell that same property. He wants to identify 4. Notice it's he, by the way. I just realized this because Jane is smarter than this. Bill wants to identify 4 replacement properties that are $75,000 each. Is that okay? Now, a lot of people are going to say no, because why? It's more than 3 properties, and it's more than 200% of what he sold. But Bill says, no, I can do that. as long as what? I close on 95% of the value of the list. So that's complicated as all heck.
Sure.
But we'll tell you who's going to help you through that in just a minute. The other timing rule is that, again, from the date of the closing of the sale, you have 180 days to complete the entire process. And of course, by default, the property is going to be, or it's going to end up, one of the properties on your 45-day list.
Mm-hmm.
Again, never any individual exceptions or extensions. You do want to pay attention, and that if your tax reporting deadline comes up while your exchange is still undergoing, you need to file an extension.
Mm-hmm.
Because what this illustrates is that there's no penalty for starting a 1031 and not finishing it, because it is always reported on the next tax return you have to file. So if you don't finish your 1031, you simply don't report it on your next tax return. If you do it, it will be reported on the next tax return. So that's why you have to file an extension, so that you can get your 180 days completed to know whether you're going to file or not.
Gotcha.
Now, here's the person that's going to help you through the maze of all these rules. The qualified intermediary, qualified by the, or required by the IRS. We are the ones that do the exchanges for you. We process it at each end, the closings of the sale, the closings of the purchase. We are required to hold the proceeds in between. And we are an unrelated third party. So we cannot do anything else for you. You use all of your regular professionals, your regular realtor, title company, appraiser, inspector. All we do is the 1031 exchange. But the most important function for us, as you can imagine, is that we're your guide, right, to make sure that you're meeting all of these requirements. And here's the most important key. The QI has to be involved before the sale closes. I get tears in my eyes once a month when someone calls, says, Dave, I sold my property last week. I want to do a 1031. Well, that's great. The next property you sell, we'll do it.
Right.
Once it sells, your chance is over. We have to be in place prior to.
Dave, I have a question about these requirements for the qualified intermediary. So we have a lot of investors who are looking at doing out of state, which is pretty common with California-based investors to try to get higher returns. With that being said, do all qualified intermediaries typically handle out of state transactions, or are there any nuances with an intermediary that works between California and Indianapolis real estate? How does that work from a
I wouldn't say that all of them do. Sure. Because there's going to be, some attorney in a small town that will only do it if you're staying there. But there's no requirement on that. Most of the larger QI firms will do exchanges nationwide. And the reason for that is that 1031 is a federal statute. So it has to be performed exactly the same, no matter the state. And I would say that, gosh, maybe 40 to 50% of our exchanges start in one state and end in another, because that's a really powerful application.
Sure.
To chase NOI. Absolutely.
Gotcha.
The key is going to be, does the QI have the infrastructure to make sure that they can effectively deal with multiple title companies in multiple states, transferring of funds, et cetera, and more importantly, do they know about state nuances to help you out? I was just dealing with a Pennsylvania investor today who asked the exact same question. Can you do this in PA? Can anybody? I said, well, absolutely. Just make sure that you're dealing with someone that knows that Pennsylvania is the only state in the country that doesn't honor 1031 exchanges at the state level. Because that's going to change some of the closing procedures.
Right.
Or that New Hampshire and Vermont require you to sign to apply for a waiver to do the 1031.
Oh, wow.
Those are things that can catch you
Yeah.
if you're not dealing with someone who's used to doing it on a national level.
So, Dave, that brings me to another question here. So, let's say I'm working with a qualified intermediary to transition my funds from California to Indianapolis, for example. And let's say that the qualified intermediary finds that they aren't very familiar with the nuances of Indianapolis, for example, but they have a lot of experience in California. I know in your earlier requirement, you had said that the intermediary needs to be involved at or prior to closing on the sale of the property. So is there any nuance on changing a qualified intermediary during the 1031 exchange where you want to go with somebody more experienced who might know those nuances at different states?
Yeah, it doesn't happen very often, um, but there is a process to do what is called a substitution of QI. It's kind of a big deal because it's sort of like going to your neighborhood store to buy
Sure.
a TV and then saying, oops, just kidding. I want to buy it from Best Buy. Yeah, it's that kind of thing. But yes, it can be done. It's not done very often. And for a couple of reasons. Because, first of all, um, in this scenario, it means that, Willie, you weren't talking to me earlier enough.
Sure. Right.
Yeah. Because at or prior to the sale, in my mind, if you want to really be strategic, means months before you do it. Because you want to start laying your strategy. Hopefully, what everybody's going to see is that there are so many opportunities to use this that you want to have that guide to be in place and working with them much prior, much before the closing of the sale,
Right.
to take advantage of it. So those people that are doing that are generally in good shape.
Gotcha. So I guess as a rule of thumb, you just really want to have that relationship with your qualified intermediary before you go into closing or are considering this opportunity. Just try to find a qualified intermediary who you know has really good experience and can execute to what you're thinking of doing.
Right, because it's as much about fit as anything.
Sure.
You want your QI to be available to answer questions.
Right.
You want to feel comfortable with divulging things to them and understanding what they say. So you want them to speak your language, which part of that, Willie, is why if you go to the 1031investor.com, there's not a tie to be seen. But if you go to our old stodgy website, erg1031.com, you'll see everybody in ties.
Sure.
What we discovered a few years ago, and it fits into this, is that today's investor doesn't look at all like the investor the last time around,
Sure.
before 2008. As a matter of fact, Willie, when I was at the peak the last time, you, I think, were getting ready to go into high school.
That's true.
So there's all this education that's needed. Honestly, does the younger generations like you resonate with a tie and a suit and legal speak?
Right.
I don't think so. It's about speak English to me.
Right.
As a matter of fact, that just jogs me. I probably ought to be doing TikTok videos for the 1031 requirements, but we'll get to that later. But yeah, so if you go to our website, that's what you're going to see is a ton of YouTube videos and calculators, because everybody's a DIY right now. You want to figure it out yourself.
Right.
And those are the kind of things you want the QI to give you just enough rope to be involved and feel good, but not so much that you hang yourself.
Right. I hear you. Sounds good.
So, title requirements, or as I call it, taxpayer. However you hold title, or whoever the taxpayer is for the old property, is how you got to take title to the new property. Now, what that means is, in essence, if you own a property and you sell it, it's in your name, generally that property is going to be reported on your personal tax return,
Right.
which means that it's really your tax return that is the taxpayer for the property. Mm-hmm. So many times people will have what we call disregarded LLCs that only have one member and they don't file a tax return. All the properties reported on your personal tax return still.
Mm.
Well, in that case, that means that you and the LLC are both the same taxpayer.
Right.
So if the property is deeded in the LLC, you can sell in the LLC and buy in your name as long as it's disregarded. Why is that important? Because a lot of lenders prefer lending to individuals.
Right.
So your ability to take title that way is pretty key.
Dave,
But again, your QI can help you wade
before
through that.
before we move on to the sixth requirement here, I had a question about the title requirements. So let's say, for example, I am the sole person on my home that I want to sell. I'm the sole person on the title for a home I want to sell. And with the home that I want to acquire with the 1031 funds, am I able to bring in maybe a sister or a brother or a parent who will come in and own the property 50-50 and have both names on the title? Is that okay?
Yes, you can. Absolutely. The key is going to be you, and we're going to talk about this in the next requirement.
Sure.
The key is that you have to take title to at least as much real estate as you sell.
Mm.
Anybody else can take title to the rest. So let's say you were selling for $200,000.
Sure.
And you wanted to buy a $400,000 duplex with a friend.
Sure.
You can do that as long as you take title personally to 50% of the property.
Got it.
They can take title to the other 50 as tenants in common.
Understood.
It's an awesome way to bring partners in because you can actually buy a huge asset because both of you can be on the loan and you come in with the cash for the down payment.
Got it.
There's a lot of things that can be worked with that way. So let's make sure we circle back to that in this requirement.
Absolutely.
It's a two-part deal. If you want to defer all tax, first of all, you've got to reinvest all of the cash proceeds. Secondly, you've got to purchase equal or greater value than what was sold. So what we're talking about here, here's the down and dirty way to figure it out. If you simply take the cash that goes into your 1031 account and add to that the amount of mortgage that was paid off, that's your reinvestment goal.
Mm.
So if you've got $100,000 in your exchange account, you paid off a $200,000 mortgage on the sale, then your reinvestment requirement to defer all tax, $300,000.
Mm.
Easy way to figure it. The other way to figure it is to say that that's the same as the net sales price of the old property.
Sure.
So that's the contract price, $330,000 minus closing costs and commissions equals $300,000.
Sure.
Minus a $200,000 mortgage equals $100,000 proceeds. So your requirement in that instance is to purchase at least $300,000 using all $100,000 as a down payment, as in the purchase of purchases. So what can you do? You could buy a $600,000 piece of property with a friend. You come in with a $100,000 down payment. They come in with a $100,000 down payment, and you own the property as tenants in common.
Got it.
So reviewing the basics, it's investment property. You got the 45 days and the 180 days to complete. The 45 is way more critical than the 180. That's where you got to really be focused. And as a matter of fact, I don't think we said this, but you can go into contract for your new property before your old property closes.
Mm.
We simply have to close the sale before we close the purchase.
Got it.
But a lot of people will structure it so it all happens within that 45-day period. You got to use qualified intermediary, and there's the title requirements and reinvestment of cash equal or up. That's the boring stuff. You ready for some fun?
Let's do it.
How can I use these things? So You probably, given your proximity to the bay and given the craziness that's happened to real estate up there,
Sure.
there's probably people that are selling some huge assets in the bay and looking to reinvest in the Inland Empire, where they can buy many more dollars of doors for what they just sold. The reverse, though, is also true. In a consolidation exchange, you can sell several properties to purchase one bigger property. So there may be people right now that have a lot of properties that are saying, you know what, the bay looks kind of intriguing,
Right.
but I can't afford it. Well, you can't afford it if you sell one, but if you sold 4 $200,000 properties, you could use that to go buy one $800,000 property. The key is only that they're going to meet all of the exchange requirements of the dates. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense.
So consolidation is going from several to fewer. And I misspoke this at the very beginning. So I apologize if I confused anybody. But diversification exchanges is selling one more expensive property and buying several smaller properties.
Right.
And this is where investors who are in growth mode want to go. Because not only, remember, you've got the opportunity to use your cash to down payments and leverage. So you can sell a property for $500,000 in cash and use that to buy 10 $100,000 properties,
Right.
using the $500,000 as leverage. You can allocate your proceeds in any way that you want. Or you could buy one property for $400,000 and use the other $100,000 as down payments on some more.
Got it.
All kinds of ways to mix and match,
right,
to generate more income. So I call that the ebb and flow of 1031, because depending on where you're at in your life cycle, you're wanting to grow or you're wanting to shrink. Are you liking the idea of being a landlord, or are you tired of toilets and tenants? Either way, the 1031 can work for you. Now, what about retirement though? In retirement, maybe you want to go someplace more rural in California. Maybe you want to go retire in a vacation area in some other state. Well, the 1031 allows you to sell where you're at and purchase investment real estate someplace else. As long as you never sell that property, you will never pay the tax. So maybe you want to go retire in Arizona. Sell your Stockton portfolio, use that to purchase investment properties in Arizona before you move there.
I see.
Then once you move there, guess what? You just caught back up with your portfolio. And now it's close to you. Maybe you like that. Or maybe, let's go all the way back to the beginning of this presentation. Maybe one of those properties you bought was a really nice property you'd like to live in. So you sell your last primary in Stockton.
Right.
And remember, that money's tax-free.
Right.
Put it in your pocket, hop in the U-Haul, move to Arizona, and move into one of your investment properties. The nicest one, of course.
Sure.
Because as long as you own it, you'll never pay the tax. So you just generated an entire sale tax-free, and you have indefinitely deferred the tax on the next one.
That's great.
Pretty huge deal, isn't it?
No, that's huge.
Now, talking about nuances state to state, the one thing that California investors have to worry about is what's called the California clawback. Just because you move your property to another state, California the Franchise Tax Board requires you to file a form every year. And if you ever sell that property without doing a 1031 exchange, California wants the profit the tax on the profit when it was in California.
Mm.
So it's all a big calculation. But the key is, as long as you never sell, or as long as anytime you do a 1031, you don't have to worry about the California clawback.
Gotcha.
Now, there's a lot of debate right now about what happens if you actually move from California as well.
Right.
There is a lot of lawyers circling the wagons saying that California cannot constitutionally or legally require a non-citizen of the state to pay tax in that state. So one answer to getting rid of the tax out of California altogether might be to end up moving out of state.
Mm.
But stay tuned, because that puppy's got to flesh itself out in the courts a little bit.
Gotcha.
But just know that you got that opportunity right now. Now, sometimes inland around you there, you've got people that are farmers, orchard growers, vineyard owners. What they actually have is two properties. They have the property they live in.
Sure.
That's the primary residence.
Right.
Remember, it's tax-free.
Mm-hmm.
And they have the vineyard or the agricultural land. That's investment property. They can sell that and do a 1031. So as someone gets close to wanting to make their final moves, they could do something like this. This family went to their 3 children and said, we're going to buy a property if you're willing that's near you.
Right.
You manage it for us as long as we live. And when we die, you get the new property.
Mm-hmm.
Now, but we still have to make the income ahead of time. The kids all said, absolutely, we'd love to do that. So the parents sold the primary residence portion.
Mm-hmm.
That was tax-free. That started funding their retirement.
Sure.
They sold the agricultural land, or the allocation of that went to the 1031 exchange, and they bought properties near where each one of their children lived. Now, think about what they did. First, they put tax-free dollars in their pocket. Secondly, they've got motivated property managers because the kids know they're going to inherit them.
Right.
Thirdly, they're making more money than they did farming. And grandma figured this out a long time ago.
Sure.
And that is that every trip to see grandkids
Tax
is a
deductible.
business write-off
Right.
to go see their investment property. And here's the big shoe that drops, because the mantra in 1031 world is, you need to get your pen ready to write this down.
Sure.
Okay. It's 4 Ds: defer, defer. Let me know if I'm going too fast. Defer and die.
Mm.
When mom and dad pass away, their heirs get those properties at what is called a step up in basis.
Mm-hmm.
So they inherit the properties and the tax disappears. So the kids get it tax free. So literally, as long as you own a property, you never pay the tax on profit. As long as anytime you sell the property, you do a 1031 exchange, you never pay tax on the profit. When you die, your heirs get it tax free and you never pay tax on the profit. So is there a reason to ever pay tax on the profit? I say no, but that's
Right.
just me.
Right.
There's what the diversification exchange looks like. You can also combine this bad boy into a retirement plan. Let's say that your investment portfolio you transitioned into, and I know we've got like 7 here, but into 7 beautiful investment homes. When you convert a home into your primary residence, remember section 121?
Right.
Once you have lived in it for 2 out of the previous five years, and because you did a 1031, once you have owned it for at least 5 years, then you can sell that and you can prorate the amount of gain between tax-free and tax-deferred based on how long you lived in it. I'm sorry, not tax-free, between tax-free and taxed based on how long you lived in it
Hmm.
and how long it was a rental.
Sure.
So if you bought a piece of property, rented it for 2 years, moved in it and lived in it for 3, did you own it for 5? Yes. Did you live in it for 2 out of the 5 before sale? Yeah, you actually lived in it for 3. So you would get to take 30% of the gain tax free.
Mm.
You'd pay tax on 40% of the gain. Okay, I know. Everybody says, but Dave, it's not 100%. Come on, man. It's a retirement job.
Sure.
My retirement job, I go live someplace nice in one of my properties. And after a couple of years, I sell it. Part of the money's tax free.
Yeah.
It's an amazing gig.
Yeah, I'll take anything at that point.
Exactly. I actually have a guy on St. Pete Beach who's got 3 condos next door to each other on the same floor.
Mm.
That's what he's going to do. He's going to move into one, and then he'll live in it, take part of the money tax free. He'll move into the next,
Wow.
and he'll move into the third.
That's great.
And then he'll die there, and his kids will get the property.
That's great.
What a plan.
Mm.
The key with this is you do have to recapture depreciation as well. So that's just another thing that's out there. But what an opportunity to minimize tax over life, to build your portfolio, to move your portfolio. You just have to make sure that these 6 requirements are all met. And that's the 1031. So tell me what's buzzing around in that brain. What kind of questions do we have?
Yeah, Dave, thanks so much. Obviously, do this presentation, it just seems like a no-brainer of reasons why you should do it. There shouldn't be a reason why you should not do it. So with that being said, we're in a really unique time right now in real estate where prices are quite high. I will say that even for myself, I've considered selling my own properties through 1031 or 121 and potentially moving to upgrade my home or continue investing. But as a lot of people who are in the Stockton REI network they have their homes, they have their rental properties, and they're just kind of debating whether to sell or not. So obviously with prices being high, this is a great opportunity to save cash, but I'm just kind of curious about your thoughts given the market and where we're at right now. What's your recommendation on like when to sell with the 1031 exchange, especially when prices are where they're at right now?
Oh, yeah. The best times to sell, there's a whole bunch of nuance to that question.
Sure.
So for a real estate investor, as you grow in experience, you start to realize that your efforts have created inside of you a higher level of education, intuition, and understanding. You are a better investor than most people,
Sure.
which means that you are able to recognize deals quicker and ferret them out better than others. So the person that is an experienced investor says the best time to sell is when I can maximize what I'm selling. Because here's the problem with the 1031, and you've identified it, but here's putting flesh to the words. The best time to sell a piece of property which is in a seller's market, is the worst time to try and finish it and buy a piece of property.
Right.
But converse is also true. The worst time to sell a piece of property is also the best time to go and buy a piece of property. So the 1031 investor isn't so much looking at today's value as they are looking at how can I value add? What's going to happen in the near term, in the long term? What's this property that I own going to do? What's this property that I'm looking at buying going to do? So there is an awful lot of analysis and prognostication that goes into the 1031 because no matter what, you're either going to have trouble on one side or the other.
Right.
So it's kind of a question of where are you a better investor? And I don't know about you, but I am a horrible salesperson. So I would always rather sell a piece of property in an up market. Because darn it, I've found a lot of good deals when people said there's nothing to be had.
Right.
Because generally, as soon as someone says there's nothing to be had, it means they've stopped looking.
Mm.
And so the opportunity is there for you. So that's kind of the macro answer.
Sure.
But the micro answer to that is sell when you can. And if we're in a market like we are right now, mitigate that by expanding your search. So Stockton's a tough gig. Okay. What's happening further? What's happening in Santa Rosa? What's happening in Salt Lake City or Kansas City or whatever? Maybe there's pockets of market inequities because not every market appreciates the same or is commanding the same levels of returns. It's up to you to find that. But you want to do that searching way ahead
Sure.
of your sale so that you've got a comfort with as soon as your sale happens, you know a good deal when you see it.
Great.
So you start shopping early. You identify things. If you can, get your property under contract for your purchase before you close your sale. There's a thing called a reverse exchange, and we've got about 10 seconds to talk about it. But basically, it lets you control your new property by us taking title to it. But here's the deal, it's really expensive, and you still got time limitations. But it can be done if the amount of profit is right. So there's the reverse exchange. You could also use backups, like maybe a pocket listing that a friend owns that's not for sale, but they'd be willing to sell it to you if you can't find good replacements. Or maybe you sell or buy your properties contingent on finding a good property to purchase. There's all those kinds of things. Maybe you put down a passive opportunity like a Delaware statutory trust that moves a little bit more slowly. So there's a lot of ways to mitigate, but ultimately it comes down to putting your big boy pants on and saying, I'm a real estate investor, and darn it, I'm going to go find the best property before someone else does.
Dave, I love that summary, especially the fact that, you're either way, whether it's a seller market or buyer's market, if you're in the 1031 exchange, it should net out. It should be a wash in that sense, given that you're selling for a high price or buying for a low price. I think it all works out. And to your point, as long as you know yourself and you know your core competency, then you should know that you're able to make value with your strategy in place.
Yeah, in thousands and thousands of presentations, I don't think I've ever phrased it quite like this. You're not doing a 1031 because of the price of the property. You're doing a 1031 because of your analysis of current and future position of where you're at and where you could be.
Right. That's great. I like that.
That's it. Thank you. I shall use that.
And with that note, I think it's a great opportunity for us to wrap up. Dave, I wanted to give you a few minutes to say any closing remarks about the 1031 exchange or anything else regarding this presentation. And then also if you could close us out with how people can reach out to you, because I'm sure we could go on for hours about more specific questions, questions for my own personal situation and situations for those of the general. But if you have any, if you could share and tell people how to reach out to you so that they can ask their own questions and get in touch with you and work with you, if you could close us out that way, that'd be great.
You got it. Well, most of your viewers live in a state that would disagree with me, but I firmly believe that taxes are not voluntary. You pay what you should and not a penny more. And that's why the Supreme Court Justice Hans quote is down there. Don't volunteer to pay, only pay what you should. And that's what the 1031 exists for. So don't be scared to dabble your toes because the results in compounding your portfolio are huge. And if you want to get hold of me, the screen says it all. The1031investor.com. We've got about 34 YouTube videos guaranteed to put you to sleep, calculators to play with if you're an Excel nerd, and you can always catch me through there as well.
Oh, that's great. So Dave, thank you so much for taking this time to present to the Stockton REI Network. I think I've learned quite a lot through this presentation, and I'm sure our viewers have as well. And I'm gonna be sure to reach out to you for some 1031s that I'm thinking about doing or some Section 121 to do myself. So thank you, Dave, again for coming. And thank you all for watching this presentation with Dave Foster, the 1031 investor. Feel free to reach out to him with any questions, comments, or concerns. And thank you all for watching this presentation.